welcome.
Good morning.
Welcome to Belgrade Online,
An online ministry of Belgrade Avenue United Methodist Church.
Welcome to Belgrade Online. I'm Dan, the video editor of Belgrade Online. It's a new year, and once again, Belgrade Online will be making some changes. Our world is ever changing, and we want to keep things fresh here at Belgrade Online. So be watching for some changes in the coming weeks. And now, without further ado, here are this week's announcements, followed by Dan's sermon and some music to brighten your day. Thanks again for watching Belgrade Online.
Hi, everybody. It's Bob Goff here. I'm sitting on my back porch, and I'm just so glad that we're going to get some time over the coming weeks to just talk about some stories, to talk about how we love one another. And we start with the people that are nearby, that are people that are in the blast radius of your love already. This series is called Everybody Always, and there's a book that goes along with it. But the most important thing I want you to know is that you're welcome here. There's something beautiful about just being welcomed. Plenty of us have been invited to things, right? Have you ever been invited somewhere you weren't welcome? There's a big difference. And so one of the things that I think that we can do in our lives is to let people know they're not just invited, they're actually welcome. And once people are welcome, they start sharing stories. And my hope is that we can just spend this next time together sharing a couple stories. And a win would be this, that after you're done watching this, you're sharing stories. Say, how has that happened to you? Where was a time that you saw somebody give away extravagant love? Who was your neighbor? We're going to talk first about a neighbor of mine. She's somebody that's taught me a tremendous amount about loving people.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Pastor Dan here. Hope everyone's having a fantastic weekend. Wonderful, beautiful weekend so far, except for this weather, because not cool, Minnesota. Not cool. Anyway, we're starting a new series this week. Technically, we began it last week, but we're really beginning it this week. And it's called How Love Works. It's the key to fulfilling relationships. And this morning, we're going to talk about the one thing that we got to keep in mind if we're going to love each other well. And that is we all give love and receive love in different ways. And if we can learn how to give and receive love in ways that each one of us feels like we're being loved, then that'll be one major step forward in every relationship, into making every relationship more meaningful in our lives. So I hope it's helpful to you. But before we get going, I do want to mention one thing. This past Wednesday night, we started a brand new discussion group with Kent Calm, and it's a Bob Goff video series called Love Everybody Always. And it's a wonderful, wonderful video series. You know, any day with a video of Bob Goff is better than not. So I'd like to invite you on Wednesday nights. It started last week, but you know what? You won't be confused or lost if you start this week. So I want to invite you to that 6 p.m. Wednesday nights in our fellowship hall here at Belgrade Avenue Church, 325 Sherman Street. And 6 p.m., there's a dinner meal every Wednesday at 6 p.m. And then we get right into the discussion and the video and the discussion group. And it's a great time. So we invite you there. And I hope that you can make it. Enjoy the message. We will see you soon. Grace and peace, y'all. Bye for now. Well, this is technically in the church calendar. If you're familiar with the church calendar, this is what they call Eastertide, or the period after Easter, because the Easter season starts on Easter, and this is kind of Easter is the characterizing point of our faith as Christians. It's the resurrection. It's the one thing that if you take that away from our faith isn't our faith anymore. And it's the resurrection of Jesus. And so now, for the next few weeks, what I want to do is I want to talk about if the resurrection is the characterizing belief of our faith, I want to talk about the characterizing note of our faith. And that's the idea of love. And so, as we do that, I want to tell you a story about this little wiener dog we had at one time. Anybody ever had a dachshund before? A wiener dog? 1, 2, yeah. So they're adorable dogs. Now, we didn't have dogs. Our first dog that we got as a family a few years back was a little dachshund, and at that time, I didn't really want dogs. And my wife knew somebody from her job that was through a friend, knew somebody that was trying to had taken in this little wiener dog, which was this couple were dating, and they bought this dog together. Well, then they ended up not being together, and they didn't want the dog anymore because it reminded them of their relationship, which was dissolved. And so they gave it to their in-laws, and this elderly couple. And so the elderly couple ended up being the caretaker for this dog, and they asked through a series of friends if somebody wanted the dog. And I was told the dog was house trained, it didn't bark, and it didn't shed. And that's how this was pitched to me. And so I said, all right, let's go meet him. Our son Charlie wasn't born yet, so it was just our two girls, and they were really little. And so I said, okay, let's tell the girls we're just going to go visit this couple because they want to show us their dog, because if it didn't work out, then we weren't going to say, we wanted an out for the kids. So didn't want to get their hopes up. Well, we got there and we met the dog, and he was this cute dog, and he had this little trick where if you went bang, he'd roll over on his back and play dead. And they taught him that trick. I don't know why. But anyway, so he seemed cute enough. And so I'm like, all right. I looked at Beth and I kind of gave her the look like, okay. And so we told the girls, we're actually going to be taking this dog home. He's going to be our new puppy. And, absolute joyful pandemonium, broke out. Well, when we got the dog home, he was great for a while. His name was Chico. And after a while, we realized he had this little quirk about him, which I then realized wasn't a quirk of just him. This is kind of a dachshund thing. Not only a dachshund thing, but there are some dogs that do this, where when you come home and you're all excited and you go up to pet them, they'll wag their tail and they'll just squat and pee. And they call it submissive urination. It's a way for them to show you that they recognize you're their master. So the dog, in order to show respect for you, pees on the floor. It's not a good loop for a dog. You want to love the dog, but then the dog pees and you want to punt the dog. And then the dog wants to show you even more that, no, I see you as my master. So it pees more. And it just creates this loop. So you got to know how to, to manage this fun little way that the dogs show you that they love you. And so we had Chico for a while, and I was like, well, we're not going to get rid of him just because he has this thing. We'll work with him. We'll figure it out. If we got to consult a trainer, the dog's part of our family. We're not just going to get rid of it. Well, then we had Charlie, and he got jealous of Charlie and would try to nip at him when he was a baby in his cradle. That was the last straw. I'm like, oh, we're not working with that one. You're out of here. So, well, then now our present dog, Maisie, which we've forsaken little dogs, and we've gone back to my heart, big dogs, big giant dogs, which in my experience are easier to potty train. But Maisie, for whatever reason, this sweet boxer, has now, all out of nowhere, started doing this submissive urination thing. Every once in a while, not all the time. So we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we, researching boxer training websites, and the nice thing about now, it's the age of YouTube. You can just go on YouTube and try to vet the trainers that are putting these videos up, but you find legit ones and figure out ways to work with your dog to have them show you they love you in a different way. But so the interesting thing is when it comes to this little quirk that these dogs have, they are showing you in a way, they're showing you that they love you in a way that they think communicates love to you. But it doesn't translate. It gets lost in translation. It's just irritating. And so when it comes to love, in order for love to actually make an impact in our world, it has to be felt as love. And when it comes to love, we all have different ways that seem like love. We all have different ways that we feel loved, and we all have different ways that we communicate love. But love in general is what we're trying to communicate. This is like the thing. This is our characterizing note. Jesus said, this is the one thing that people will people will recognize that you're my followers if you love one another. It's not, how you stand up for your whatever pet belief you have, or what pet political opinion you have, or whatever it is. None of that matters. Matter of fact, those things distract. It's how you are how you treat people, how you are with one another. Are you kind with one another? Are you, in short, loving with one another? And so we have to understand what love is and how to communicate it with one another. And I found this kind of, I was looking online and I found this questionnaire that was given out. And they asked people the question, what is love? Give us a definition of love. What does love mean to you? And so here's some things that they said. And this was all age groups that were surveyed. What is love? Somebody said, love is love, end of story. Another person says, love is a fairy tale that never ceases to amaze. Another one says, love is a game of attrition. It's when two lovers stay together and bother one another until one of them perishes. Another person says, it's the unification of two souls. They asked a preteen a question, and they said, what is love? They said, it's when you can fart freely around someone. Another person said, it's what our dreams are made of. Somebody says, it's temporary madness. Another person says, love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. It hits hard and then slowly fades, leaving you stranded in a failing marriage. Break the cycle, rise above, focus on science. Valid, I guess. Love is seeing the download time get lower for computer people. It's when public restrooms have 2-ply toilet paper. Love is when you find someone who has the same wavelength of weirdness as you. Love is buying an extra thick chocolate milkshake after craving one for the whole day, but your significant other accidentally drops theirs, so then you give them yours. It's good. Love is the point in a relationship where logic becomes absolutely irrelevant. What is love? It's a mental illness that forces one to do foolish things. It's the fall of every man and woman. Someone says it's giving your last morsel of food to somebody, even though you're extremely hungry. Love is like a fire. There's no telling what it's going to burn. It can either warm your heart or burn your house down. Somebody says love is a big waste of time. Another person says it's a term that means zero in tennis. Love is nothing. It's a romantic misunderstanding between two fools. Another person says it's that feeling when puppies lick your face. It's a word people use when they're trying to get you to do something. Love is when you look at someone the same way that I look at my dog. And it goes on and on and on. One of my favorites is, love is like learning how to swim. At first you may be scared, but as you go on, you just be comfortable to pee in the pool. So many people have different ideas of what love is. Some are quirky, some are interesting, some are a bit depressing, and some are happy, But there's many definitions of what love is in our culture. We always kind of talk about this. You could use it in the term, I love hot dogs, or love makes the world go round, or love wins over hate, or I love my spouse, I love my dog, I love God. Using the word love, but they have different flavors depending on how you use it, different levels, different intensities, different applications, right? They all have different meanings. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's how language works. The scriptures have different words for love as well. They have different words. There's the Greek word philos, which is also has different connotations, but at its base root, it just means kind of friendship, kind of a love, but it's tight-knit friendship. There's eros, which is usually kind of the romantic love that we think of when you hear the word love. You know, the kind of love that is, talked about in all the songs that we hear. That's actually eros. But in every time Jesus mentions the word love as a commandment, it's always one Greek word, and it's the word agape. People have talked about it, the God kind of love, but it just simply means to give. It's actually an action. And some translations even translate it as charity. It's not a feeling. It can include a feeling, but it's not a feeling. It's actually an action. It's an action of goodwill toward one another. And it can be applied to our friends. It can be applied to our coworkers. It can be applied to acquaintances, family members, strangers, even our enemies. And yet every time we hear that love is the greatest commandment, I think many of us have different ideas of what that means, especially in our modern world, in the context of our modern relationships. And many of us probably think of romantic love, that ooey, gushy, tingly feeling, But that's a fleeting kind of a thing. It comes and goes. But that's not what Jesus usually means when he says love is the greatest commandment, or love your enemies, or everybody will know that you're my followers if you have love for one another. The word love that he's referring to is the word that means to give with goodwill toward others. And that's simply that. But in our modern relationships, it becomes really difficult to put that to practice. It's a nice sentiment, looks great on greeting cards. It makes for good sermons that are really general and just are full of bland platitudes and pat answers, But in real life, in the grit and the struggles of everyday life, it's a bit more difficult. How do we love in our everyday life? Because relationships today have a ton of challenges. They always have, but especially today. And here's some statistics to show you this, According to the American Psychological Association, communication problems are the most common reason for divorce, with 65% of divorces citing communication issues as the factor. So 65% of divorces say that they're dissolving their relationship because of communication issues. Another study found that 41% of couples will argue about money, while another study found that 23% of couples argue about household chores. Basically, all kinds of different stats like this that indicate relationships can be difficult in the modern age because of a difference in priorities. Because nowadays, in our world, it's kind of like every person in every household is kind of their own culture in a way. We all have different priorities and different things that are important to us, and different goals in life, vastly different goals in life. So we have different priorities, and that makes relationships difficult. But then there's another thing. A survey found that 63% of people who feel underappreciated at work are considering leaving their job. This suggests that feeling unappreciated can be one of the major sources of frustration in our jobs. So not only is love an issue in our relationships with our spouses or our significant others, but even with our coworkers or our employers or employees, feeling underappreciated can destroy those kind of relationships, make us want to leave our jobs. Notice it doesn't have anything to do with our job itself. What makes us most of the time sort of jaded with our jobs is how our relationships are within those jobs. But not only that, when it comes to just friendships, personality differences were a major cause of conflicts. Friendships who have vastly different personalities have a higher likelihood of experiencing conflict. So there's differences of personality. There's lack of appreciation. There's a difference in priorities, you know? And so research has also shown that the biggest factor in relationship satisfaction is this little thing called trust. Higher levels of trust in a relationship have greater levels of satisfaction. Trust was the second most important factor in predicting the success of a relationship. The first one being commitment. But so you've got these different things, these different difficulties in our modern world relationships, lack of appreciation and lack of trust and lack of differences in personalities, in our difference in priorities and communication problems and different things like that. It makes things difficult. So think about those things in a bit of a context. And those are just numbers, but let's think about context a little bit. Consider some of these scenarios. Let's say that there's a couple, we'll call them, I don't know, Bob and Sarah. Bob and Sarah meet. There's this instant connection. They spend hours and hours together. They go on dates, talk on the phone late at night, and can't wait to see one another. The weeks turn into months, and the months turn into years. Marriage, kids come along. After a while, though, the tingles, the excitement starts to fade, but it's not for a lack of trying. They work hard at their marriage, and I say hard, I say they work hard. Sometimes they have little moments of an oasis where they connect and all seems right, but it'll eventually end up going back to being frustrated, and it just seems like instead of connecting, they're just kind of shooting past each other. And it seems like nothing they do seems appreciated by the other one. And they try to go about their everyday lives together, but they find themselves completely jaded with one another and growing apart. Did the love, quote unquote, fade simply because the tingles aren't always there? What about friendships? Let's say there's two people, they sit next to each other in a college course together, they get along, make each other laugh, they grab coffee between classes, they have this shared quirkiness together, and they end up becoming really great friends. But as time goes by, they start to drift apart. One becomes busy with work, and maybe a significant other, and another one starts to deal with family issues or, anxiety or something. And they still talk occasionally, but, the conversations just find themselves to be kind of surface level and unfulfilling. Did sort of the friendship, platonic love that they have for one another fade just because they got busy? Or think about coworkers. Coworkers who want to have a more collaborative, creative collaboration together, say it that way. But they just can't seem to get past a superficial level of friendship, because you need synergy to be able to make some things like that work, They can't seem to get past this superficial level of friendship. And it keeps them from producing something really meaningful together. Or even parents and kids or grandkids and kids. It's easy to love our kids when they're really, really little. But once they get past second grade or so, how do we continue to connect with them when we don't know how? When they start to have their own opinions about things. When they start to really exhibit their own will in bigger, more mature ways. And there seems to be so much tension, Is love impossible in those real life scenarios? Because we can watch a movie about love, and there's always happy endings in movies, and we can hear a sermon about love, and it's all nice. But when it really comes to applying it in real life, is it really helpful? Is love impossible in real life? No, of course not. It takes effort, but listen, all the effort in the world won't help if we're not doing the right things when it comes to love. So when, Dan, when you say the right things, what are you talking about? How do we love one another in every scenario of our lives? In short, how does love work? Well, that's kind of what I want to talk about in this series. And like I said this morning, we're beginning this new series, and it's called How Love Works, the key to fulfilling relationships. And what I want to do is I want to use this Easter season to talk about this thing that Jesus said is most important as his followers. It's the one thing that causes the world to recognize that we're his people. And like we said earlier, this is love. How do we love one another better? When it comes to love, Jesus and the scriptures have a ton to say about it. So I'm going to shotgun a couple things at you here from scripture. First one is from John chapter 13, verses 34 to 35. We've read this a lot in the last couple of weeks. Jesus says, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples or you're my students. If you have love for one another, if you love one another." Love's the characterizing note that makes us identifiable as followers of Jesus. 1 Corinthians 13:13. When all is said and done, the Apostle Paul says there's three things that remain when it comes to following Jesus: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is, everyone, love. Galatians chapter 5, verse 6. Again, the Apostle Paul's writing and he says, in Christ Jesus, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through
Love.
through love. Not faith expressing itself through whatever your opinions are. Faith expressing itself through love. Through love. Opinions polarize. Love has goodwill towards someone else's. First John chapter 4. This is the Apostle John writing now. He says, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. But whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, then God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us." So I shotgunned those scriptures at you real quick just to kind of show you that this is the biggest deal. This is the biggest deal of our faith. Jesus says it's the characterizing note that identifies us as his followers. The greatest of all the elements of our faith is love. And the only thing that counts really is our faith being expressed through love for one another, acts of love for one another. But then the Apostle John goes further and says, if you love, you were born of God. If you find yourself having goodwill towards those around you, not saying that you can't, have the opposite of tingles towards one another and still be, it's like if you're irritated with someone, you can still be loving when you're irritated with them, Love isn't a feeling. The tingles of love will be there and not there as quickly as the tide comes in and out, as the waves come in and out. But our underlying attitude of goodwill and good actions toward one another is what identifies the God kind of love. It's real simple, yet it's really complex. So how do we take this and apply it into our everyday lives? We're going to talk about this for the next few weeks. But when it comes to making sure this love has maximum impact, we have ways that we feel love and ways that we express love. And what most of us do in our lives when we love someone is we just sort of, you ask, well, how are you loving that person? What do you mean, how am I loving that person? What are you doing? How are you loving them? I'm just loving them. They probably go through a couple different things and they hem and haw and and because they're getting through that part of their brain that doesn't access language easily. And so they're going through this and like, when it comes down to it, we're all loving in ways that are natural to us. But the ways that are natural to us in decoding love isn't always natural to others. We all give and express love in different ways. So what happens is when we love one another, it's kind of like, taking a bow and arrow and you're firing arrows everywhere. It's a silly example, but like you're firing love arrows. Man, that sounds cheesy, but you're firing love arrows everywhere, right? But if you want to do it effectively, archers, if you want to hit a mark, archers aren't just firing all over the place and hoping something hits the goal over there and they're over here. You pick up an arrow, you point it, you draw it back, you take a deep breath, you close one eye, and you fire and you try to hit the mark. You're intentionally trying to hit a specific mark. And love is that way. We have to learn how to intentionally love the people that mean the most to us. And then go one step further, even to our enemies. So many of us are sincerely trying to love one another, but it just ends up kind of going all over the place, hoping that, and then when the other person doesn't feel loved, doesn't reciprocate love, whether it be a child or a parent or a coworker or a spouse or a significant other or a friend or whatever, when what we're doing doesn't land and they don't feel loved, we become defensive. And then we become defensive and the other person feels that tension if we're not verbal about it or something. And it just kind of, it grows. We are loving sincerely. Romans chapter 12, verse 9, the Apostle Paul says, love must be sincere. But when it comes to love, this might kind of sound weird, but it's true. When it comes to loving others, sincerity isn't enough. Because what we do is we judge ourselves by our sincerity, and we judge others by their actions. So, we give ourselves understanding, but we give others very little, comparatively. We might give others a lot, but we give ourselves even more. And so, love must be sincere, but sincerity isn't enough. That's how we get this culture where, we label somebody else toxic and we don't really evaluate how our behavior might be toxic. That buzzword that everyone uses, everything is toxic. We say things are toxic now just because somebody makes us uncomfortable, Discomfort can be a good thing because it drives us to change. But when it comes to this, when it comes to loving one another, our love must be sincere, but sincerity isn't enough. When we're loving someone else, it has to actually be felt as love to that person. When people are loving us, they can do things for us, but we don't feel, they can do the world for us, but we might not still feel loved. If in your relationship, if your significant other or your spouse has ever said something like, I do this for you, but it's never enough. And you're like, what are you talking about? There's some sort of a breakdown of speaking each other's love languages. You could say it that way. We all feel love in different ways. And we all have our own unique love language. And what do I mean by that? When someone feels love towards us, but that love isn't expressed in a way that their love is felt and makes us feel that love, then eventually we will not feel loved enough to continue in the relationship. If someone's actions towards us aren't communicating, if it doesn't make us feel loved, eventually over time we won't want to continue that relationship. And vice versa, if the way that we're loving others isn't felt as love by that person, eventually they're not going to want to stay in that relationship. And like I've been saying, this is true in friendships, with our spouses, with our children, with our grandchildren, with our parents and our grandparents, with our co-workers. Each one of us can feel love toward others, but if we aren't communicating in ways that make them feel our love, then eventually they'll detach and they won't desire to be continuing on in the relationship anymore. Love may be sincere, but sincerity isn't enough. We've got to learn to communicate in something called each other's love languages. And there are there's a book out there called The 5 Love Languages that was written, and there's not just 5. It's a kind of a poppy book, but inevitably this psychologist identifies 5 categories of love languages: ways that we give and receive love, ways that we naturally communicate love to others, and ways that we feel loved when others communicate that way to us. And he says that there's 5 categories. You could say it that way. They're very, 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 very broad categories. But it's kind of a very simplistic way of boiling this down. for the purposes of kind of understanding this concept, I'll give them to you. So he says there's 5 love languages, ways that we give and receive love, according to this guy. Again, these are broad categories. Words of affirmation. You feel loved when someone says affirming things to you, or others feel loved when you say affirming things to them. Words of affirmation. The other thing is physical touch. If anybody has ever said, I'm a hugger, that's their love language. They're physical touch kind of a person. If somebody feels loved when they receive gifts, or if somebody shows love by giving little gifts for others, that's love language is gift. There's acts of service. Someone feels loved if someone does something for them, or they communicate love to others by doing things for others. Words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, acts of service. And the 5th thing is quality time. Many people I know don't feel loved unless they have quality time with someone, with their person, their friend, their spouse, whatever. Many people don't feel like they're effectively loving someone else unless they're giving quality time. So we're going to talk about, for the next few weeks, the idea of love languages, and we're going to kind of use these 5 categories as a way to talk about it. But what I want to say, though, is there's limits to thinking about the 5 love languages in this way. With these 5 categories, words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, acts of service, quality time, these are ways that we can give love, and there's also ways that we receive love. So you can have sort of one love language, how you give love, and the way that you feel loved could be a different one. That's the first thing I would say about these. Second thing is that these aren't static. We're not like programmed with one thing our whole life. These could change with the seasons. These could change with the days, This is just a grid of helping us to understand one another. It's just a broad starting point, that's all. So they're not like set in stone, etched in our psyches kinds of things. The other thing I want to say about those is these are categories that are really oversimplified and really overgeneralized. This is just a basic way to start small, to understanding how we can love one another in ways that the other person feels our love. And we can learn to communicate how others can love us better, those that want to love us better. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks. This is a caveat, another caveat when we talk about this. This could be an easy way to manipulate others. Like someone likes gifts, so you're gonna get them gifts just to get them to do what you want them to do. Yeah, that's not what we're talking about here. Don't do that. Don't attempt to use someone's love language to manipulate them into whatever self-serving agenda we might have. The purpose for this is to help understand ourselves better, understand others better, and increase connection with one another. So that's what we're going to talk about for the next couple weeks. And my prayer as we talk about this for the next few weeks is that 3 things will happen. Number 1, that we can identify some ways that we express love to one another. Number 2, that we can identify ways that we feel loved from one another. And then number 3, we can identify primary ways that those closest to us feel loved, so that we can speak their quote-unquote love language. Because it's my belief that as we do this, if we can do this, that our relationships will be strengthened, and that we'll be able to fulfill God's commandment to love one another in more heartfelt ways and in more effective ways. Instead of just kind of being like the dog who thinks that they're loving us, but's just peeing all over the floor. So that's the idea. That's what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. I've got no grand story to end this with or anything. It's just going to be we're just going to kind of talk for the next few weeks. We're going to just have some discussions, and we're going to talk a little bit, and we're going to talk about relationships and talk about practical ways that we can love one another as Jesus told us to do. God, thank you for this day. Thank you for your love for us. And like the song said, help us to learn how to love one another. Help Help us to serve one another like you served us, like you loved us, like you spoke to us, like you spent time with us. God, like you physically came to earth in a body and touched us. God, I just ask that you would be with us and help us to learn how to step outside of ourselves and rely less on just our feelings, but add to their feelings understanding and goodwill and action, actionable love toward one another. And we know that your Spirit is with us when we do that. Because you said, and the scriptures say, that when we love, that you're present with us. So help us to live this out. Help us to practice it. Help us to fumble through it like learning a new instrument or something. Help us to do it really bad and then over time get really good at it. And help us to be okay with that. We thank you for this day, and I just pray blessings and safety on everyone as they go. In your name, amen.
This is the time for hallelujah. This is the day to lift your voice. This is the dawn of new beginnings. This is the day for joyful noise. Hallelujah, hallelujah. This is Resurrection Day. Hallelujah, sing hallelujah. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, Christ is risen from the grave. This is the day the garden wakens. This is the time for hope and life. This is the moment death is shaken. This is the dawn of truth and light. Hallelujah, hallelujah. This is Resurrection Day. Hallelujah, sing hallelujah. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, Christ is risen from the grave. The dark days the world has waited, looking for the Son of Light. Now the earth with joy is singing as she brings the risen Christ. Hills and valleys ring with song, all creation sings along. Come and join with voices strong. He is risen, risen, risen. Christ is risen, risen today. This is the time for hallelujah. This is the day to lift your song. This is the dawn of new beginnings. This is the day the voice is strong. Hallelujah, hallelujah. This is Resurrection Day. Hallelujah, sing hallelujah. Christ is risen, Christ is risen, Christ is risen from the grave. Jesus is risen, risen today.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Belgrade Online. If it was life-giving and encouraging to you, please let us know by visiting our giving page at baumc.org/give. Thanks again for watching and have a blessed week.